Welcome everyone to our Facebook Live event. I'm Barbara Harrison with NBC4 here in Washington, D.C. I'm so happy to be here again. This is my third time hosting this event. The event today focuses on adoption from foster care, specifically the adoption of teens and the need for more foster and adoptive parents. We're going to be hearing stories, sharing advice, and answering some of your questions. You all are going to help me out with that. We have a great team here. USA Today, with us here today, Bob Hearn, National Project Director with AdoptUSKids, and we also have some wonderful adoptive parents and adoptive teens who will share their stories with us. Let me introduce them to you right now. First up, we have Gigi Keene from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Welcome. I know you're from a subdivision or suburban area called Lauder Hill. All right, well, we will remember that. And we also have Amy Arnson from Duluth, Minnesota. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
They are parents of adopted children, and we're going to hear from there for at least one of your adopted children today. And we have two kids who are from adoptive families. Amy's son, Isaiah, from Duluth, Minnesota, as is she, and Chloe Edwards from Glen Allen, Virginia. They're going to be sharing their experience and their adoption stories from foster care, the experiences that they've had. So we thank you both for joining us today. Let me remind you that you can ask questions too. You're watching us live via Facebook, and we want to hear from you. Please post your questions on the comments part, and we will do our best to get to your questions and get as many answered as we possibly can. We're going to start now, though, with Bob, who, as I said, is with AdoptUSKids. You know, you have a new series of PSAs, public service announcements out, that talk about the firsts, that so many people feel like they've got to adopt babies because they want to experience all the first things with a child as they grow up. What they don't see or don't think about is that there are a lot of firsts that you can experience with a teenager.
Right, and so we're really excited in AdoptUSKids in partnership with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council have developed these public service advertisements that really highlight the joy of adopting teens from foster care and experiencing their first with them. One of them is his son, and he's helping him to ask a girl out on his first date. And the other is, the other side of that, a young woman who's experiencing her first breakup with her boyfriend. And sometimes people talk about, well, I'm going to miss out on all these firsts if I adopt a teenager from foster care. And what we want to highlight, and we have wonderful families who have great stories about those firsts, is that firsts continue throughout all of our lives, from our first job to our first partner to walking down that aisle on our wedding day. And on all of those occasions, it's so important to have the support and love of family. And that continues throughout our lives. And our teens who are in foster care desperately need families who can provide the unconditional commitment and be with them and celebrate both their exciting firsts as well as be there for their challenging firsts.
You know, I know that some of your older PSAs, maybe it was last year's set of PSAs, where they talk about having a perfect parent.
Right.
What is a perfect parent? Maybe I should start with you, Bob, and then I'm going to ask you all the same question. Sure. What do you see as a perfect parent?
So a perfect parent is someone who's not perfect, and that's why our tagline is, you don't need to be perfect to be a perfect parent. And so what we know is that a lot of families have considered adopting, but they don't think they're good enough. And what we know, and these parents will highlight for us, as wonderful as they are, it's our quirkiness. It's the things that we have experienced and the challenges we've experienced in our lives and have overcome that give us the empathy and the understanding to help our children through those. So for all those families that out there that said, you know, I thought of doing it, I just don't know if we're good enough, most of you are really good enough, and I hope when you talk to our families today and they talk about some of their quirks and how it's actually helped them with providing permanence for their teams, that people will reconsider.
Well, Amy, how old was your son when you adopted him?
Isaiah was 16 when he moved in with our family, and then he was 17 when his adoption was finalized.
And what do you think you thought you had to be a perfect parent to him?
I think one of the things that Isaiah has taught me is that if anything, I want to try harder to be a mom, just because he hasn't always had that positive role model in his life. But at the same time, I still burn dinners, I still undercook dinners, I still forget to sign permission slips when he was in school. So there's various things that, and we're all human. And so everybody, misses things here and there. And I'm certainly am not a perfect parent by any means, but he really makes me want to be a better mom.
Well, anyone who's ever raised a teenager knows that they will ask you, or they will tell you that you're not what they were expecting. they are so quick to tell you that they don't like something you do. Do you hear that from him? What do you think his expectations were from you as a perfect parent?
I think Isaiah came into our family just wanting to have a family. And so I think his expectation is that he would have a family that would be there for him no matter what. And I really hope that we have upheld that for him.
Well, Gigi, let's ask you. And how old was your daughter when you adopted her?
17. She was 6 weeks shy of her 18th birthday. So it was kind of right to the last second there.
And I think a lot of people don't realize when you adopt a teenager, even when it's 17, almost 18, they're still kids and they still need parenting. So tell me about what that experience was like. What did you expect of yourself as a parent?
I think part of the reason why we've been successful is because I expected nothing. My expectations on a scale from 1 to 10, we were at a 0. So we just kept expectations very, very low, preparation very, very high. And you stay positive, you stay optimistic, I think that helps things go well. So for us, it's been a very rewarding experience, and I think that it's transformed us as not only as a family unit. We were a family of 4. My husband Chris and I had 2 kids already, Carolyn and Christopher, and now as a party of 5, we're even stronger now.
Were they younger children, your biological children?
So my biological kids at the time, my son was 9 and my daughter Carolyn was 14.
And how did they feel about welcoming a new member of the family?
It was actually an easier conversation to have with the kids than it was to have with my husband, even though having the conversation with my husband was not hard either. He just had some analytical questions about college tuition and health insurance and things like that. He wanted to make sure that our daughter Macy did not miss out on any benefits by us adopting her. So there's a lot of myths out there, and we certainly were full of them at the time. We've learned a whole lot.
And how old was she? You told me she was just about to turn 18.
Yep.
So the benefits could be a question, I guess. Is that right?
It could be, yes.
But you were able to solve that issue.
Yes, and I mean, honestly, with a website like AdoptUSKids, we were able to get our answers within a week. So within a week, my husband and I made the decision to take the next step. The next step was to talk to our biological kids and then sign up with our local agency for an orientation where you just kind of go and you just hear information. No commitment, just I want to learn more.
Now, the other 2 are teens now as well?
My youngest is still not a teen, he's 12, so he's a tween, I guess.
Yeah, right.
But he's the kindest, sweetest boy, so he doesn't have that tween-like attitude yet.
Yeah. Well, and does your daughter talk
Yes.
back?
Which
The
one?
oldest one?
Yes.
The older one? And that's
Yes.
okay. That's what kids
absolutely.
do. What teenagers do.
Absolutely. And kids, who have been in the foster care system, I don't see them as different from, perhaps for me it was easier to have that perspective because I had 2 biological kids, but I really feel like their developmental stages, their struggles, very similar to what typical kids who have not been in the system. So I feel like take that stigma off of them instead of foster care children, just children first. And I think that helps.
I know that I'm expecting a question to come in on the iPad from those of you out there, and let me remind you again that we are taking questions, but can you just give me the question and I will relay it because I'm not seeing it on the iPad. Bob, tell us what's it like adopting from foster care? How difficult is it, and what do you have to do if you decide that's something you'd like to do?
So I think the first step in adopting from foster care is doing something like going to the AdoptUSKid website and getting information. You're making an important decision, a lifetime decision, and gathering information. And most families I know start usually on the internet and start looking, and then getting referred to their local community resource, either at the state, county, or a private nonprofit level, to go into an orientation and learn more about that process and what your individual state does. And a lot of families actually go to multiple orientations in order to find the right agency that feels right for them. And then after the training, the family gets an assessment done. There's some paperwork that has to be done. And when you're adopting an older child, it then becomes a process of the family being introduced to children and youth who sort of fit within the parameters of what they can parent, and developing a relationship with that youth and getting to know them, because it's going to be a joint decision. And then eventually agreeing to move forward and moving through the court finalization process.
And let me remind people, we are taking your questions, and now I'm getting them on the iPad. And the same person, I think, wants to know, how long is the process? Because when you're adopting an older child, you don't want to think you're going to be waiting for 2 years. How long will it take, do you think?
So the adoption process, a lot of it is dependent on the individual family. So some families have done a lot of pre-research and they're really determined and they want to go, and they go to training and they have their paperwork in the next day, and they have all of that piece, and they're going through a home study pretty soon. And some families already have a pre-identified child that they are aware of, and so if there's a child who you already know who's in the system and you've been identified as a possible resource, those can go pretty quickly. For other families, it goes pretty much 6 months to sometimes 1.5 years. A lot of that being determined by the family. There are various stages where they're making decisions, right? Gigi talked about her and her husband having to make some very informed decisions before they move forward. And sometimes that happens as you're going through the process. The question arises and you're like, oh, well, we really need to figure this out before we move forward.
Yeah, well, so how did you meet your daughter?
So we have kind of a unique situation because I work at the high school she attended. Macy is hard of hearing, and I worked in the special ed department of the school, and so that's kind of how our paths crossed.
And you, how did you meet Isaiah?
So my husband and I decided to go through the foster to adopt process, and after we did the home assessment and whatnot, you start being matched with youth or children, and we just started researching the different children that are out there, and which is just heartbreaking because every profile you read, everyone is worthy of a family. And when we saw his profile, sorry, I don't want to get emotional.
Okay.
But when we saw his profile, my husband almost started crying, and so we just knew we had to meet him.
Well, he was meant to be with you.
He was meant to be,
obviously.
yeah.
And when you met him, you had seen him first
Yep.
on the
paper.
computer, and he turned out to be exactly who you were looking for.
And so much more. He has just absolutely blessed our life.
Well, is it better to try, Bob, to reach out to your local jurisdiction who might be handling foster children? Is that where you should start, or should you go to AdoptUSKids website and see who's there?
Well, so going to AdoptUSKids is going to give you a broad overview and tell you those resources, as well as give you an indication of what your local resources are. When you actually then decide that that's what you want to do and you want to become a licensed family, you need to go through a local state agency in your state. Even if you're interested in a child who lives in another state, everything is mandated legally by that state. So then you should go to what's happening in your local county or city and make a determination. We usually inform people that they should go both to a public child welfare orientation as well as a private nonprofit foster family agency orientation to make that decision about what's right for your family, going which type of agency to go through.
Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but we do have another question that goes along with this, so I wanted to be sure to get it in. Someone is asking, how do you adopt out of state seamlessly?
Okay. So that is not seamless, especially if you don't previously know that child.
Right.
So our belief in the child welfare system is that first we try to find a family within that child's community, because they've already lost one thing. We don't want them to lose possibly their school or their friends or their community. If we're unable to find somebody within their local community, we try to look within the state. And then if we can't find a family within the state is when we begin to look for a child outside of your state. So our recommendation is always to first look for a child who's within your own community or your own state, and then if that doesn't work out, then to begin to branch out to look outside and do that interjurisdictional placement. So that is possible. You will see AdoptUSKids has a national photo listing. You can see children from every state, and we have interstate compacts between states to make those placements possible. If you're going to be doing an out-of-state placement, you just have to be patient and realize that it's going to take longer. There's a lot of legal paperwork that has to be completed, and I know sometimes that can be frustrating, but let me tell you, it does not compare as much to the frustration that young person who's living in foster care waiting for permanency is experiencing.
And often you can meet children as you're waiting.
You can.
There are foster care parties and things around in the different jurisdictions,
Yes.
and you can meet those children and maybe identify a child as you're waiting.
Correct.
I want to remind people again, just write your question in the comments section on your Facebook, and we will try to handle all the questions that we get. So have you found that you have both become that people are interested in hearing your stories, and maybe you might be the resource for other parents who may have been thinking of adopting from foster care and they want to hear how it worked for you?
Yeah, I know what I have experienced is that I'll have people asking me questions, and then I'm not realizing where the question is going, and then they will divulge that they're thinking about doing foster care to adopt, and so that's why the question makes a little bit more sense. And so I welcome those type of questions, because it is a major decision. You know, like Gigi and her family, we have 2 other children as well, and my kids are both older. And so for us, it truly was a family decision. Our family of 4 made the decision that we were moving forward with this, and that's something to this day we can't think about our family without him anymore. We're now a family of 5.
And how about you?
Well, I do think people are interested. That's why we're here.
Yes, and we want even more people to get interested. And I think hearing your stories make a real big difference. When people hear that it is wonderful, it's great thinking about it, but when it actually happens, it's even more wonderful.
Yeah, so I do think people are interested. However, I do also think that they see themselves as like one entity, and like adoptive parents as like, oh my God, I can't even, how did you do that? That's so amazing. We're all the same. Like we are not exceptional in any way. Well, I'll speak for myself. I am not exceptional in any way. We're regular folk. So you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent.
And that's a good way to move on to our commercials. They're not really commercials. These are the PSAs that are running right now. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, Isaiah and Chloe, the 2 kids that we told you about, adopted children, are going to join us, adopted teens. They probably don't like to be called kids, but we will be back in just a little bit. Take a look at these PSAs. They'll answer a lot of questions for you.
Hey, Dad. I need your help asking Jessica to prom.
Of course. Love is like the ocean. You have to tread the
Oh,
waters.
Dad. That's not the kind of help I needed. Hey, Jessica. Will you go to prom with me?
Yes.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care can't wait to share their first with you.
Oh, no. What happened?
Dave.
Oh, I got this. Hey, Carol.
Dad.
Let's take off his sweatshirt. Get rid of pictures of him. We don't have to look at him. Goodbye, Dave.
Mom, you don't understand. He's tagged in like 400 of my posts.
Well, I can cut out tags.
No, that's not how it works.
What is a tag?
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care would love to share their first with you.
Hey, Dad. I need your help asking Jessica to prom.
Of course. Love is like the ocean. You have to tread the
Oh,
waters.
Dad. That's not the kind of help I needed. Hey, Jessica. Will you go to prom with me?
Yes.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care can't wait to share their first with you.
Oh, no. What happened?
Dave.
Oh, I got this. Hey, kiddo.
Dad.
I'm sorry. Okay, you know what? Let's take off his sweatshirt. Get rid of pictures of him. We don't have to look at him. Goodbye, Dave.
Mom, you don't understand. He's tagged in like 400 of my posts.
Well, I can cut out tags.
No, that's not how it works.
What is a tag?
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care would love to share their first with you.
We are back, and joining us now, Isaiah and Chloe, two adopted teens, and we're so happy to have you with us. Bob's still with us, and we'll continue to answer your questions. And remember, write your questions into the comments section, and we will answer them as they come in. We look forward to hearing from all of you out there. I'm so glad that you all were able to come. We talked to two adoptive parents, your mom, and we are so happy to have you here as well, Chloe. Why don't we start with you? Tell us about your adoption story.
So I actually wasn't adopted. I went into what's called kinship care, which is a relative placement. And it's an alternative way to divert the foster care system. It's foster care prevention. But my permanency came in the form of a permanent guardianship with my grandparents at the age of 14. And that was solidified probably before I graduated from high school at almost 18. That placement became officially permanent.
Had you known your grandparents?
No, I actually didn't have the opportunity to know them prior to my placement. So it started off as weekend visits with my grandparents just to get to know them.
And how old were you then?
I want to say I was probably about 16, no, 15, because I remember I had almost started driving around that age. So yeah, it started off as weekend visits, and then they had assumed all daily responsibilities of me and my sister. So then it became permanent.
Were they in the same town where you were living already?
They were actually. They lived very close to me, about
So you
2
didn't have
minutes
to
away.
change schools or anything?
Well, that almost happened, but because my sister and I were such good students, we got a variance to the school that we were already at. So around that same time, my grandfather started teaching us how to drive, and we were able to drive ourselves to school.
Wow. It was just you, or you had siblings that were also part of the...
I had siblings. I'm a triplet, actually.
Oh,
but
wow.
My sister, Megan, was placed with me, and my brother, he had stayed with my mother.
So you're triplets, 2 girls and a boy?
2 girls and a boy.
Wow. So are the girls identical?
No, we look alike, but we're all very, very different,
Yeah.
and we look different,
Yeah.
too.
Well, we'll talk to you again in just a minute, but first, Isaiah, tell us about how you discovered your parents, who obviously love you. We were just talking to your mom a minute ago, as I know your grandparents do too. Everybody is always, everyone I ever talk to, Bob, who has adopted, really falls in love overnight. Maybe not even overnight, maybe within minutes of meeting their child that's going to be with them forever. They say you weren't, you were born born in my heart, not under it. That's where, have you ever heard that expression? Never. You've heard it. Well, maybe you can describe it a little bit better than I just said it.
You know, I think a lot of people want to expand their family, or they really just want to do something for a child who's in need. And sometimes they don't realize the impact it's going to have on them, and that they get as much as they receive.
Right.
And the one thing I hear from all of our families pretty uniformly is that how much they absolutely love all of their children, and how they can't imagine their life without these children in it. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity.
I'm gonna repeat that saying, because I remember it was an adoptive mother who said it to me, and she explaining to her daughter that she had not grown in her tummy. She said, "You grew in my heart, not under it." So
Okay.
that explains that, and I think I said it right that time. But tell me about how you met your parents.
Well, they had a social worker of mine that I had named Chad. He had shown me like a packet of them, and I was like, well, these are some interesting people. Like, they like to go hiking, like they like sports. Some of them like sports. They all play instruments. I thought it was just cool, and then my mom, she used to play an instrument, but yeah, that was interesting. I saw some videos on Facebook about that, so I was like, I'm gonna go try to meet these people. And yeah, I met them at Perkins, and yeah, I mean, I was really nervous. I was super nervous because my dad does not smile ever, ever. And he just had this mean look, and he was in a cast. I know must have been miserable, so I was just really nervous, and I ordered a bunch of food, like a ton of food, and I just didn't eat it. But I was nervous, but then, because I didn't know what they had thought of me, so they went back, and then that next day they called me and asked if I want to come to their house, and I was like, well, I guess sure, they can.
Yeah.
After that, I went to their house one time, and
that was it?
Yeah, I like the dog, like my dog, which is my dog now. I love him. And
How long had you been in foster care?
3 years.
3 years. Yeah. And was this the first family that you met?
Actually, no, it was the second one. I had never met the first one. They talked about it, and then they just kind of changed their mind, and I was a little sad, but then I just kind of like kept my head up, and then I met my family.
It's very pretty interesting, Bob, isn't it, that somehow kids do always seem to end up in the right family, at least most of the time that happens.
I think most of the time that does happen.
I have a question for you. Why are teens in foster care available for adoption? Why are they typically removed from their families if that's the way it happened?
So it's very difficult to remove a child from their biological family, and it's due when there's ongoing abuse and neglect, and that's determined by a court of law. And then our first goal is to try to reunify that child or those children back to their biological family. And foster care is always supposed to be temporary, to provide that safe temporary placement till we can either get that child back to their biological family. If we're unable to do that, we have a duty and a responsibility then to find a family that can provide that unconditional love, safety, and support for our children that all children need in order to thrive. And what we do know is that children who age out of foster care statistically do not fare well in our system. And when we look at our own families, shouldn't be too surprising. When we see the ongoing love and support that children need and that we give to children, and even into young adulthood, that doesn't end. All of us always need someone in our lives that's unconditionally committed to us. And that needs to happen for all children, including every single child who's living in foster care.
Now, having worked for many years with teens who were in the foster care system looking for adoptive homes, or at least those whose protection they were in were hoping to find adoptive families, many of the teens would say to me, I don't want to get adopted. I don't want to be adopted. I just want to wait till I'm 18 and then I'm going to go on my own. And I think a lot of them really don't mean it. They think they mean it. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
Did you feel that way?
Oh yeah. I mean, like, I'd come from a family before that I lived for 13 years, and I didn't want another family. Like, I didn't want it. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to even like the idea of it. But then after a while, you just kind of like, you need it. Like, I didn't mean it at all. Like, I missed it. Like, I didn't know what it was like. So like, when teens will say that, but like I know that, like, me personally, like, I know I needed a family. Like,
Well, a lot of teens think I'm too old to have anybody telling me what to
Exactly.
do.
Yes, exactly.
And how did you feel about that?
Well, I have a different perspective because I went into kinship care with my relatives. I didn't necessarily have to be adopted, and my parents didn't have terminated parental rights, which would be required in the case of an adoption, but I still found permanency in my very own special way. In work previously, I'm in the political field now, but previously I was in foster care and adoption field. And there were a lot of older teens that didn't want to necessarily get adopted, but in many cases they may have needed a permanent mentor in their lives. They may have needed a brother or sister figure that was permanent, someone around their age, or maybe later on they would consider adoption, or perhaps after aging out be reunified with their family. But there's many ways of permanency.
You know that we've gotten another Facebook question for you. How long did it take you to mesh with your new families? How long did it take you, Isaiah?
not very long.
Days, weeks, months?
I'd say a week. I mean, I'm sure like my parents maybe have a different. Me personally, like I had this kind of shield up. Like I just didn't want to like get anything too high because like when you are in foster care, you just kind of have that. But once like I started getting comfortable, then I started slowly kind of letting that down, and then.
So did you get a smile from your dad eventually?
Eventually, I did. I got one out of him. Yeah, I eventually got one.
So he didn't look scary to you after the first time.
Not too bad. No, after that first time, I was like, all right, he's all right.
Well, you know, sometimes you, I think I can imagine that what the person is like. Maybe they're scared.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the parents are a little bit afraid. How much should I show my emotion? How much should I hug you and not push you, make you want to move away? Did you have that sense at all?
No, I can't. I didn't like. I just didn't like. It was kind of like I just wasn't getting my hopes up too high. You know, like I was just prepared for anything. Like this isn't gonna like be permanent. Like don't get your hopes up. Like, and then like after the first time that my mom and dad dropped me off back at my foster home, I was like I don't wanna. I kind of want to be there. So like I was hoping that this would work out. So.
And what about adjusting to moving in with your grandparents?
I can't say it was easy. It was difficult because you're used to what's home to you, and their house wasn't home at first. So it definitely took a couple of months. Luckily, I wasn't in it alone, and I did have my sibling with me, so we were kind of going through it together. But it's a process. But in time, my grandparents, they're very open, and we would, if they were worried about us, they would have family meetings and. Then their main thing was socializing us. In our former household, we really weren't social. We all kind of stayed in our rooms and everything. So they wanted us to get out there and be active and be social. And as we were adjusting, they involved us in very positive activities. So we kept busy.
Bob, we have a question coming in for you. How are matches made between families and teens in foster care? Who makes the decision?
So it's actually a joint decision that's made. So the older a child is, the more say they have in the family who they're going to be living in. So when families come in and they're interested in a young person, then what we do is we check with that young person, we give them some information about the family, and we start setting up some meetings. And we do that over a period of time. And then we check in with both the family and with the youth to see how things are going. And so each plan is individualized. There's not like a prescriptive, because it's really to meet the individual needs of that youth and that family coming together. And what we have to remember is some of our youth have had extreme trauma in their lives. And sometimes it's when they get into that home that they finally feel safe, that they're allowed to experience that trauma. And so sometimes that takes a little bit of an adjustment period, because that family then helps, what that family is able to do, which is a complete blessing, is to help that child to deal with that trauma and get to the other side of it. And really, the best way to heal in trauma is with unconditional love, commitment, and support. And so that's why sometimes it takes a little bit of time to do that. And that's why placements with older children in families take time as well. The one thing we want to make sure is that this is going to work out, that the child doesn't experience another loss and trauma in their life.
And what about help from the jurisdictions where the children come
Right.
from, for kids who may have some emotional difficulties making that transition. Do most states or the counties or whatever jurisdiction is handling the child make those kinds of services available to parents?
They do. There's some wonderful things that are happening now. A lot of, maybe the audience has heard of trauma-informed care, and there are a lot of mental health therapists who specialize in adoption competency mental health services, who understand that when a child and a family come in their struggles, that in some ways this is really positive. This child and young person is feeling safe enough to experience and share the trauma that they had been, and that helps the family then to join with that child to help them through the process. So if you go on to AdoptUSKids website, you'll see a lot of post-adoption support services, and for families who have adopted, they can go to their county and their local departments of behavioral health and mental health and get those. We also really encourage families to stay within an adoption community to get that support from other families who understand maybe some of the issues that they're going through. And so I also encourage people to go and find what is their local support group. Even families that are considering adoption, by going to a support group that's made up of a group of families who are in various places in that process, it provides you invaluable resources and supports.
You know, recently I met a young man who is now actually a police officer here in the District of Columbia, who had gone through so many different placements that by the time he got to the place that thankfully he ended up staying, he was really scared that he was not going to be able to stay there. He thought that they would give him up.
Right.
What do parents usually say is the reason, those who take a child and then decide that they don't want to keep that child?
Well, we you know, once in a while that happens, and really the goal is to come in and provide supports to help that family in order to keep that family whole. And any of us who have been parents, especially at the teenage years, have wished that there was a time we could send our children away.
Exactly.
As much as we absolutely love our children, parenting can be difficult at times, and being a teenager, sometimes the older I get, it can be really challenging as well. There's a lot going on. So what we really do in those circumstances is come in with lots of support for that family to help them to get over those hurdles.
I think it's really amazing, and this particular story I was telling you about, having gotten over that, this young man who is not so young anymore, he's in his late 20s, and he says he can remember when the breakthrough happened, and it was pretty quick, that he knew that he was there to stay. And I think that both parents and kids have to be prepared for those little emotional moments when you're not sure, to just work through it. As you were saying, even with your biological children, you're going to have those kinds of things that happen. So, perfect parent. What is a perfect parent?
I don't think there is a perfect parent, but I think there are parents that are perfectly imperfect. But really, for me, the most important thing is just loving that child unconditionally, agape love, no matter what they do. And then also just being there for them, there to guide them through the most important moments that do happen in your teenage years, so that they can have that permanency and normalcy and an equal opportunity at achieving success.
And you know, we've been talking about perfect parents. We were also talking today about firsts, how a lot of parents who adopt foster children who are already in their teen years don't really miss some of the first things that happen. Tell us about some of the things you did with your parents that were for the first time ever.
I drove my truck for the first time. That was the manual with my dad. That was the first time I drove with my mom. Actually, we almost got hit by a car when she was trying to drive for the first time. We didn't look both ways before we crossed the road, and a car almost hit us. But that was the first time I drove, that was with my mom. So that was a memorable one for me. It was just probably driving for the first time.
Any firsts for you?
Oh, there's a whole bunch. My first car accident, that was all of 5 minutes away from home, and my grandma drove down and met me at the accident, and Unfortunately for the woman I hit, she was on her way to PT from a different accident.
Oh, no.
But then my
Hopefully
grandmother
she's-
wasn't mad at me, and she forgave me, and that's what parents do. And now that I'm older and have established a career, my grandparents have actually been a part of me advocating for kinship care with Voices for Virginia's Children. So they help recruit other parents, other families that look like mine.
So Bob, for people who are watching and thinking about, well, maybe this would be something that I might want to do, how many kids, how many teens are there out there across the country? Do you have a figure?
Sure. So there's over 118,000 children and youth today living in the United States who are in foster care that need an adoptive family.
Wow.
And of that, over 20% are teenagers. So this is an issue in every state, in every county, in every city. And so what I would hope today is that our families would go to a website like AdoptUSKids.org and learn more about who our children and youth are. And we have actually photo listings of who some of our youth are, to listen to the stories of our youth and the impact that adoption and permanency has made in their lives. And to take that next step, whether it's to go to an orientation session, whether it's to look at mentoring a young person. But if we came together as a nation, we could certainly meet the needs of these 118,000 children and youth. I might be out of a job, but that would be a wonderful thing.
I
would
agree.
celebrate that if next year we're coming and saying, because of Facebook Live, all of the children and youth living in foster care have an unconditionally committed adult that provides them love and safety.
We all hope that that will happen.
So take the next step.
Take the next step. And I'm so glad that all of you out there were able to join us today and to hear the stories and the stories of the adoptive parents. I wish we could get them back in here. I think we have enough room on the sofa
I
for
think
them.
we should. We should have a celebration dance.
We will absolutely do that. I look forward to being invited again next year, and I hope the numbers are down, but I hope that those of you out there will take action who've maybe been thinking about it, or maybe you have been thinking about it just since watching us today. We hope you'll have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you next year.